Welcome to Postwave. I'm Trevor.
This is Eric.
So today we're going to be talking about this book, Doing Good Better by Will MacAskill. And I'm really excited for this conversation because this book has had a pretty big impact on me over the past year and a half or so.
Oh. Yeah, I can tell based on some of our previous discussions.
Yeah, it's something I think about basically every day.
Wow.
In one way or another.
I can see why, having read this book, that it makes me at least think that it's something that I should think about every day.
Yeah.
I don't know if I actually will. We'll find out, I guess.
Just to note, as always, that we're two music teachers who like to talk about a bunch of highfalutin topics that are sometimes slightly beyond us. So if we make any mistakes, please send us a nice email at postwavepodcast@gmail.com and let us know what we got wrong and how we can fix it. We always love to learn new things. Thanks. Yes, this is something we discussed on, I think, at least one or two episodes at this point. But about this time last year, a little before that, there was kind of a run up to it of a few months or a year or so. I had this existential crisis about what I was doing with my life and making art and having a career in art. And this book was definitely one of the things, if not the main thing that precipitated that. It just made me everything that I'd kind of been told about following your passion and the value of your contribution to the world and how certain you can be that you're actually figuring out accurately how to best help the world.
Yeah, so it centers around this idea he calls effective altruism. Could you explain that for us?
Yeah, so this movement has really blown up in the past, I don't know how long. Not that it hasn't been around for too long, but it has its roots kind of far back though. So this kind of whole thing started with Peter Singer, who's this philosopher who's known for a bunch of other things, including effective altruism, but one of those things being the vegan animal rights movement. He has this big book, Animal Liberation, which I think was one of his first big breakthrough works that is basically one of the founding texts of veganism and kind of hardcore animal rights activism.
So you wonder who you got that from?
Yeah. Yeah, Eric and I both have a close composer friend from undergrad at CU who's a hardcore vegan activist, and I believe that's pretty much all he does now, or like the main thing he does for work.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, Aiden Cook, you probably doesn't mind us saying his name.
No, I mean he's been in the news tackling Kamala Harris. No, he didn't actually do that one. he grabbed. That's what the news said he did. He grab the microphone out of Kamala Harris's.
That's right. I totally forgot about that. Wow. Yeah, I guess I hadn't thought about that since she became the vice presidential nominee.
I hadn't thought about that either.
That's a little crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Anyway, so it all kind of started with Peter Singer, but most recently, the guy who's been one of the big faces on it has been Will MacAskill, who's the author of this book, and he's a philosopher from the UK. And one of the main things he's done besides writing books like this and essays and all that stuff is he started this organization, 80,000 Hours, that provides a framework for people to think about their careers and their lives in this way, and just puts hours and hours and hours of research into trying to determine the best way to have the impact that you want.
Why is that called 80,000 hours?
Because that's the average amount of time that you put into a career if you stick with it through your whole life.
And so what is effective altruism?
Right. So it's basically, so if you break it down, altruism is just, wanting to kind of put the needs of others before your own, right?
Yeah. Although, put a pin in that because I remember from the book he defines it slightly different.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Let's see. Do you want to maybe
sure,
say
I can elaborate. I mean, he just specifies that it doesn't necessarily have to be putting someone else in front of you. Just it means that you want to help other people.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And I could see how it could have kind of that other connotation if people weren't told otherwise. I feel like it does kind of have the implication of putting others' needs before your own, in the sense that part of the idea is to go without kind of the finer pleasures of life or kind of extraneous purchases that you wouldn't necessarily have to have. So you're supposed to put others' needs above those kinds of like frivolous needs that you might have.
I see. So this I think touches on the core question about effective altruism for me, which is, where do you draw that cutoff? What needs are important enough to say that this matters in a life, and what is frivolous?
Yeah, and I think it's a really good question.
How do you even begin to measure?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's it's interesting because he spends a lot of time in the book talking about how to measure, the effects of certain like charitable contributions and kind of interventions, and how they could change people's lives based on measures like quality of life years, or quality adjusted life years, QALYs, I think is the right acronym. But there's lots of metrics for that, but there's not really a metric of like how essential is this thing, to a happy life. I mean, I think it kind of maybe comes down to this idea of marginal improvement. Like if you buy a really fancy sports car, you think it's doing a lot, but in comparison to how happy it's making you compared to, another car, it's probably not worth the extra, $50,000, $70,000 that you're spending. Like it might seem that way to you. I mean, I think I definitely wouldn't extend it to, I mean, something like eating out at a nice restaurant every once in a while, that kind of thing. Or, going out to see live music, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I guess that's an interesting question then, is based on what metrics, though, is that a fair cutoff? Because something about that seems very reasonable and intuitive to me, as being someone who those sort of luxuries I could afford, but to me buying an expensive car seems like a frivolous waste. And so I can justify, well, the smaller luxuries, like going out to a nice restaurant, are things that I can afford, and it's not that big a deal, right? But one of the major points in this book is he talks about the 100 times multiplier. Can you describe that for us?
Yeah, so that's the idea that in especially in developing countries, your money will go so much further than it would go here. One, because of the exchange rates, but two, also because improvement in quality of life goes proportionally by income. You giving them $5,000 is gonna double their level of happiness, more or less. Even if it doesn't double, it'll do as much for them as it would do for you. If you're making $35,000 a year, it would be the equivalent of you making $70,000, and that would just be life changing. Like, holy shit! Like I'm moving up, and everything is less stressful now, and so Yeah, so that's basically the 100x multiplier.
Yeah, so it's this trend, right, where it just happens to be about 100. Your money will go 100 times further, and it kind of shows up in a lot of places. So for you going out to a nice restaurant, and maybe you spend what, $50, to you that seems like a reasonable expenditure for your lifestyle. I mean, you're not being super frivolous. You just do it every once in a while.
Mm-hmm.
But $50 would be what, the equivalent of $5,000 difference you could make.
Right.
For someone else.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it's.
Well,
yeah.
That's definitely a simplification.
Yeah.
But let's bring some actual numbers in. What were some of the most effective ways he recommended you could spend your money to help people?
So I know off the top of my head, I know a big one is malarial bed nets. There's lots of like simple medical interventions that will very reliably save huge numbers of lives on average. I know another one is in treatment for intestinal worms.
Yeah,
which is a problem we don't really have to ever think about in the U.S., but it's especially in Africa, it's a huge problem.
Yeah, right, because it's so cheap to fix that problem that we already fixed it for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
But so let's find the numbers. How far does 50 go in terms of, say, treating gut worms?
I mean, he does kind of say the thing he says exactly what I was saying about if you double the income, it's always the same increase in reported happiness. But you're looking for something more concrete than that.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to know, like, because there are very robust data about exactly how much you can help people by donating to cure gut worms.
Okay, so this is actually a really interesting thing because it's one of those things where the effects go way further than you would think. Mm-hmm. So what he says is that one of the huge impacts was that it cured absenteeism, not cured it, but made the problem
in school.
Yeah, it made that problem so much less. So he said, absenteeism is a chronic problem in schools in Kenya, and deworming reduced it by 25%. In fact, every child treated spent an extra 2 weeks in school, and every $100 spent on the program provided a total of 10 years of additional school attendance among the students. Enabling a child to spend an extra day in school therefore cost just 5 cents. It wasn't merely that deworming children worked at getting children to school, it worked incredibly well.
Wow. Okay, so you could go out to dinner for $50, or you could put 100 or 1,000 kids in school for a day?
Yeah. yeah, it's ridiculous. Yeah, and as I was saying those examples, I mean, the music one obviously I've been wrestling with, but somehow I'm comfortable with the idea of going out to one of those meals, like once a year or a couple times a year. But like those places existing is something I'm less comfortable with.
Places where you can spend that kind of money?
Yeah, where just to
eat?
Yeah.
Yeah, the fact that we have a culture that's built so much around decadence and indulgence and selfishness, right? It's thinking about treating yourself as opposed to how your actions affect the world.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's. Well, are you talking about people who go to those restaurants or the people who are running and owning those restaurants?
All of it, the whole culture it kind of glorifies being rich. I mean, I think that culture is more prevalent in certain areas of the country and others. I think it's especially prevalent in big cities like New York, where it's kind of like a dog eat dog world, where if you don't have money, you're not considered to have value.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is kind of ironic given the cities are also like the largest concentrations of poverty, I would imagine. Country too.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the reason I asked is because I feel like a lot of people who run those restaurants probably have the genuine desire to just enhance people's lives and give other people wonderful experiences and that kind of thing. But it is kind of all wrapped up in the same focus on just material pleasure and benefiting oneself and that kind of thing, and decadence for the sake of decadence.
Yeah. Do you know how restaurants came into being?
I don't.
It stemmed, as I understand it, from France at the time of the Revolution, where you had this highly decadent society pre-revolution, and suddenly the revolution happened, and there's a lot of cooks who have this skill set and are now unemployed, and so they put their services to the general public with the the kind of the marketing tagline of "Eat like a king for a day," right? This is the chef that has been cooking for the king or the person who studied under him, and now you can eat that food.
Yeah, wow, that's wild. I mean, I'm sure there were restaurants before that, but are kind of modern,
Yeah, the sit-down dining sort of deal.
Yeah, and specifically like really really fancy, if you want really really fancy.
So I can see that you could make a case that even just going out to eat is a decadence that you can't really justify. I don't think that that's the only way to look at it, but I think you can make a case for that.
Yeah, and there is just the question of how far down the rabbit hole you want to go, because as I mentioned, Peter Singer would say you should go as far as that it's actually harming you if you're giving $1 more to charity. Then like basically you have to get down to the level where you're basically just scraping by.
And that's I think a question. I mean, it seems a little, I want to say, or I hesitate to say preachy, because on one hand it seems like there's definitely a good case for that, but on the other hand it's like, but who are you to tell other people how they should spend their money, how what sacrifices they should make?
But why do you think that?
Why do I think?
Why do you think it's inherently bad to tell other people how to spend their money?
Because it's my money, not theirs. If it were theirs, they could spend it.
Yeah, I mean, not that capitalism is all bad, but I feel like that's a very capitalist perspective.
It is. It very much is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think there's value in sharing your ideas and making suggestions about how you think it would be good for people who have certain desires toward helping people, that they can do so more effectively if they follow certain guidelines. But I think it's something different entirely to go and say, you should do this. You owe this to the world.
I mean, yeah, because the implication is kind of, you're a bad person if you don't. You should feel bad.
Yeah. Which I don't see as productive, because it's so, I mean, in a certain way it's judgmental in a way that alienates people and puts them down. And I think if you have more empathy then you can see the other person's point of view. And if you have more empathy, you can see the person who's maybe making what you'd call a selfish decision, and you can see the honesty and innocence in that.
Mm-hmm. Although I think we have to distinguish two kinds of people that you're trying to convince. And one kind is someone who has this genuine desire to impact the world in a positive way, but they're just skeptical that donating that much of their money is a good way to do it. And then there's the other kind of person who denies that that's even a goal that you should have, or that it's a worthwhile goal. And I feel like a person who genuinely wants to impact the world in as positive a way as possible is someone that should be more receptive to that kind of argument, and that you shouldn't feel bad for trying to convince them, as long as you do it in the right way and aren't condescending or any of that kind of thing.
I mean, for me, I think a lot of the key for having effective dialogue about these sort of things is to not come off in the slightest bit preachy, or taking the angle of, I think you should do this, but rather just showing how it can be an effective means of helping, and letting other people make their own decisions about whether they want to do that or not.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the end that's probably a pretty fine distinction, more in just the way you frame things and how you word things, because I feel like the information is going to be the same. There's just not going to be that final punch of, you should do this. If you don't, you're bad. I feel like it's like 99% overlap between the two things.
I think you're right. It's a super fine distinction, but I think that distinction is actually hugely important, because I've been on the receiving end of people trying to convince me of certain things, like, for example, ethical, like veganism, and as just a person who had not considered those points before, having the information presented to me was valuable, but having it presented in a way that felt preachy, that felt, do this or else you're not worthy of my time, or not that was ever explicitly said, just almost kind of tacitly implied, but still that extra little kick didn't kick me over the edge. That kicked me back. That gave me a huge amount of resistance to accept it, despite the evidence being presented.
Yeah, because it's very easy to just have people put up a wall almost immediately if they decide that they don't like how someone was talking, or if that's all they end up focusing on. So yeah, I agree. But even though it might be a small distinction, it's definitely really, really important, because otherwise none of the other stuff gets through.
So, with that in mind, here are some ideas from this book that we find interesting and could be valuable for you all to hear as well.
Yeah.
If you so choose.
Yeah, hopefully we got all the equivocating about not sounding preachy in before the actual preachy sounding stuff.
Now we can preach away.
Yeah.
Although, I mean, to be honest, read this book, or at least the part of it we're talking about today, last night. I'm still sort of deciding how this is going to percolate into my life, or it's yet to be determined. But I definitely think there's some really valuable ideas in here.
Yeah, that's good to hear. Yeah, it definitely takes a long time to digest, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So did you get through all of part one, or?
I did, yes.
Cool. Okay, so I think a really good way to frame this is this famous thought experiment that Peter Singer came up with in the 70s. He had this article called Famine, Affluence, and Morality, and in it he comes up with this thought experiment, which is that you're walking along and you see this child drowning in a shallow pond that would be like trivial for you to save them from. Imagine it's like, 2 inches of water or something like that. And but you're wearing a fancy expensive suit, so you hesitate about whether to help them because you're gonna get your suit, you're gonna get your suit wet, and it's gonna or your shoes, um, and I don't know why. After thinking about this for a long time, I don't know why this has never occurred to me, but I mean, it's silly, but why don't you just like strip off all your clothes and
I think you're ducking around the point of the...
Anyway,
why don't you just strip off all your clothes and run toward a child?
So the big questions in philosophy. Anyway, so that's basically it. And so people would have maybe two objections to that being an analogy for donating the right amount of money to the right places in the world, or trying to have a direct impact through your career. And the first thing is that you're not directly there in front of the person who's suffering. They're in most cases at least on the other side of the city, if not on the other side of the world, and so they're not directly there. And there are other people who are not way more stressed. There are other people who are also in distress that are maybe even closer to you. The other one would be that it's not just you. There are a bunch of other people that are also there that could also help. And so the burden is not necessarily on you to save whoever it is that's suffering.
Although I think the latter point maybe doesn't hold water. Will MacAskill has this thing that he says where it may feel like you're putting a drop in a bucket, but it's not the size of the bucket that matters. It's the size of the drop.
Right.
Which every single person has the ability to make the world or the lives of other people a better place, regardless of if anyone else is doing it.
Right. And Peter Singer has a pretty direct argument against it as well, that's a little more philosophical sounding and convoluted, but we'll post a link to the...
What, on this podcast?
We'll post a link to the full article so you can read it. So yeah, I feel like that thought experiment frames the thinking in a really clear way.
So it seems to me like we have two different camps here among the effective altruists. We have the Singer group who says, spend every penny, live destitute. Then we have MacAskill's group where he says, do what you can, help a bit, maybe help more if you like it. He suggests people donating 10% of their income towards these highly effective ways of helping other people. He shares an example of a doctor who decided to find employment that is gives him the most money so that he can donate more money, and who donates 10%, but sometimes up to 50% of their income.
Yeah, and I forget if he talks about this in the book, but something people talk about a lot on 80,000 Hours is that whatever high impact job you think would be good for you to do, there's a probability that you could, if you get a really high paying job, you could fund like 5 other people doing that job. especially if it's something that's not very well paid and there's a lot of people who want to do it.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of, monetary resources to pay people to do it.
Mm-hmm.
If you were just able to fund those positions, then you could have, multiple times the impact you would have actually doing that job.
So that's really interesting. I think we have here a situation where capitalism and altruism are kind of going hand in hand, right? You have opportunities to make more money yourself, and the better off you are yourself, the greater impact you can have to help people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, this whole thing is kind of rooted in, or it like assumes a capitalist system, which is actually a criticism people will lob against it. That it's kind of it's not really solving the problem, like the root problem, which is capitalism, and the fact that we're just so much the basically that there's so much wealth imbalance. That's the real problem, and if we could solve that some other way, then maybe this would be necessary. But I think, like I said, I don't think capitalism is totally wrong-headed, and maybe this is the way to kind of remedy a lot of the bad outcomes.
Yeah, I'm with you on capitalism. I think that as any social economic system, it can get wildly out of proportion, but it has its merits as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should have some kind of capitalism, but also universal health insurance and UBI.
Universal You're saying you're a socialist, Trevor?
I don't even...
Commie bastard.
I don't know if universal health insurance and universal basic income necessarily imply socialism, but...
No, I'm totally open to those ideas. I think there's definitely a lot of possibility there.
So a lot of these arguments, I feel like, can seem overly simplistic and direct, and you're kind of get responses to say, oh, it can't possibly be that simple, and you kind of get the image in your head of the celebrity on TV, in like the infomercial, just telling you, donate to save the children. You only need, $1 per day or something. And I think that can kind of be used to brush away the seriousness and weight of the actual arguments that are presented. But the thing that I keep going back to is just how extreme and unusual our position in the US in 2020 is compared to the entirety of human history of, tens of thousands of years, and that our power to actually help large amounts of people is just so concentrated. And we're in the 90 top 1% of global income. Like, we are the aristocracy.
I was pretty surprised when he showed that graph, which shows the income over the whole world, and if you were making $52,000 per year, then you are in the 1% of the world population. And my first thought when I read that was, oh, well, but what about how expenses are so much higher in the U.S. and in developed countries than in developing? And then he goes on to say, oh no, we accounted for that already.
And it's like, to even show a meaningful graph, the part, it's probably like the 0.1%, but it's just like, it would be like 20 times the height of the book to even show what the graph would look like, right?
More than 20. It was like
or like a building
higher than the skyscraper, higher than Godzilla.
Right.
That was it.
That's
higher
right.
Than the original Godzilla.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, so why are we fucking toiling our asses off here, donating 10% of our income that we need for like not too unbasic necessities, when fucking Jeff Bezos could do all of this for us and not even notice it.
Yeah, and again, I think that's kind of the same argument about capitalism, which I'm sympathetic to. That maybe maybe people who are just making, kind of middle of the road incomes, even if it's kind of above average, like maybe those people aren't the problem. But I think, given the chance that trying to persuade people like him who aren't donating like significant amounts to philanthropy, considering that that's probably almost a lost cause. Not that you should try to do it, but
just accept Big Daddy. Big Daddy's
right.
law.
Big Daddy always gets what he wants.
Mm-hmm. That's how it should be.
So someday when we're famous and we have like 200 episodes, there'll be like a Big Daddy supercut.
Or it's just us saying like Big Daddy, Big Daddy, Big Daddy, Big Daddy.
Yeah.
Big Daddy.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, there's like 5 more of them. So fucking dumb. So here's a question. Should we be trying to help people who are not well off at all? Isn't it? Okay, so this is a question that I feel like imperialism has been asking / hedging a particular answer toward for all of history. We have any point in history that you have an empire or a large body of people, you have wealth disparity, you have a class system, you have people on the very top who are way better off than people who are lower down on the who are supporting them. And what imperialism seems to be saying by its existence is, at least it's trying to say, it's better to have a few people who have everything than to have everyone the same, but everyone very slightly better off. Because after all, a peasant is going to suffer. Even if that peasant, you can help them a little bit and make them suffer a little bit less, isn't the world a better off place if there's someone who doesn't have to suffer at all?
Yeah, so you're talking about kind of the huge inequality of imperialism, not necessarily the like conquering other places.
Yeah, exactly.
Of imperialism. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess maybe imperialism isn't the right word. Classism, class-based societies.
Yeah, I mean it's not exactly feudalism, I guess, that you're talking about.
Yeah, not exactly, but it is that element of imperialism and feudalism that I've just described.
Yeah, clear class divisions.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and part of what goes into that is the assumption that everyone deserves their station in life, that they got there through hard work or lack of hard work. And especially in the U.S., because we have this idea of the American dream. If you just work hard and keep your head down, you will move up in the world and you'll be able to improve your life and your children's lives. And we have this idea of if you get a 4-year college degree, then that's kind of your ticket to moving up. And both of those things are not really true.
You're right. I think that's a convenient lie, but I don't think that this imperialism, as I'm calling it, really relies on that at all. I think that's just to make people not have to think about it as much. But if you consider, like, what if you have 100 people and one person is really, really rich and those 100 people are really poor and giving all their wealth and production toward the one person. Now you have one person who can afford to live outside of the bounds of that suffering. Maybe that person. So let's take it again into high class society. You have people with a lot of money and affluence and time, and they can invest in things like the arts and other things. So isn't the world a better off place to have that, to have the high soaring castles and silk and pretty maidens, than if it didn't?
I don't think so. I mean, because the the amount of conscious beings who are experiencing those things is so small, and that can only do so much.
Mm. It is limited for sure. It's absolutely a small percentage of the people actually get to experience that. But the difference is between that and no one getting to experience that.
Yeah, but I mean, if no one was experiencing it, then no one would miss it.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a difficult line to walk here. Like, you can look at these things and say, what is the value of those things? They're just decadence. They're just arbitrary, unnecessary indulgences. Or you could look at them a different way and say that these are the heights of what civilization can accomplish. By finding those extremes, we show what we're capable of and increase the quality of life, at least for some people.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that kind of thinking about, like great works of art or scientific discoveries or, great works of literature. I don't feel the same way about like nice cars or fancy houses or that kind of
that's
thing.
Funny because I agree. I feel the same way whenever I see a fancy car. I kind of get a gross feeling in my gut, like, who spent that much time? But I think that might be kind of arbitrary because, after all, isn't a fancy car a remarkable feat of engineering and design?
Yeah, but it's not just, oh, here's this thing that humanity accomplished. Now it's done. We can move on to other things. It's no, let's make, millions of these so a bunch of rich people can buy them and keep them in their garages. And
what's the difference there?
Well, because it's a huge expenditure of resources that could be doing something better.
Yeah. You may have a point. Yeah, but I guess my question is, what makes something decadent versus a necessity or valuable?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And again, like I feel like this is something that I don't see it addressed as often as it could be within effective altruism.
That's what interests me the most about it.
Yeah,
I don't think there's a clear answer. If there is, I don't have it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's a gray area thing.
And I think, sorry to jump in, I'd love to hear what you were about to say, but I think that is why it's so important to me not to be preachy and tell people how they should spend their money, because I think you can cut that so many different ways. How are you to say that your interpretation of what is essential and what isn't is the right one? And isn't it better to let everyone make their own decisions?
Right, totally. And part of it is that part of the reason you need things that are a little bit more than just, the bare essentials is that that's kind of what keeps you going and keeps you wanting to live more and wanting to, produce more that helps the world. It is different for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there are certain things that are beyond the pale, like like private jets, or like $5 million houses and that kind of thing.
I completely agree. And just to play devil's advocate, because some people who have a lot of money out there actually think what I'm about to say. They think, no, those things are absolute necessities because I get freedom. I deserve freedom because I can achieve it. And therefore, by indulging in all these ridiculous things, I'm exercising my freedom to do whatever I want. And it's that freedom that gives me agency that makes my life worthwhile, that makes any life worthwhile.
Yeah, I mean, I do agree with the last part of what you just said. Part of maybe part of the reason I brought up cars so much is that I heard Joe Rogan say the other day, like something like, I'm gonna buy all these nice cars because like I'm the person that gets to do that because I have all this money, so therefore I should do it.
Yeah.
And like, not exactly what you just said, but similar. Just like I was really just like, yeah.
Was he being serious or facetious?
Oh no, I think he was being serious.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the mentality.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's like, who else is going to have these things? I'm the one who can have them. Therefore, if I don't have them, no one else will, and there will be no experience on the earth
exactly
of someone having a fancy car.
And even though my gut reaction to that and to seeing the fancy cars and is that it's a waste of money and that money could be spent someplace better, I can't refute that. I mean, I can't say anything to disprove that.
Yeah, I mean, it's not. I don't know if it's about disproving necessarily. I just think it's. Yeah, I just think it's really selfish.
It is, but I guess maybe Joe Rogan would say, so what? I'm selfish because I'm me and I get to be selfish.
Yeah. Something Ayn Rand.
I think maybe one way we can look at what is a reasonable indulgence is happiness across different income brackets.
Mm-hmm. How's that?
I'll find the link for this study, but I've heard that happiness can be measured, average happiness as it relates to your income level. So if you're below the poverty level, you are more unhappy on average, and as you go up through middle class, you slowly, gradually become more happy. And when you get to about upper middle class, making, I don't know, $60,000 to $200,000 per year, or maybe I think maybe like 100 to 200,000 per year, you peak happiness. On average, people are more happy, but then when you have more money than that, your happiness starts to plummet on average.
Yeah, no, I think I've seen that same thing.
So that might give us some meaningful insight as to how much wealth a person can have and actually derive meaningful things from that.
Yeah, and maybe that's part of the reason people feel the need to compensate once they get to the super high levels of wealth, because they're actually trying to account for some of the stress and unhappiness that comes with just that much wealth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so that's why you can have people like the doctor in Doing Good Better, who is making $200,000 per year and donating $100,000 per year to charity, and then living on $100,000 a year, which is a very comfortable income.
Yeah, sorry. What exactly was your point about him?
That is a moral thing to do, rather than saying no, he should donate $180,000 a year and live on $20,000. I don't think you have to go there.
Right. Yeah, I would say anyone who's, even considering this seriously and giving any chunk regularly to charity is I would say it's good enough, or at least that. I mean, you're obviously doing way more than the vast majority of people in your situation are, and I think that's enough.
We hope you're enjoying the episode so far. Thanks for taking the time to listen.
If you'd like to save our child from drowning in a shallow pond.
If you'd like to save our child from drowning in a shallow pond, there's a few ways that you can do that effectively.
You can go follow us on Facebook or Instagram, or check out our website at postwavepodcast.com, or send us a nice email at postwavepodcast@gmail.com. Let us know what you think. We always love to hear from people. And tell your friends about us. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.
Yeah. Although I would just add that part of what would push me towards being okay with that as well is that, especially if you're living in the US, you have to account for someone in your family getting sick and just immediately having this just massive medical bill that you're not going to be able to pay, and that making that much and then saving it away can help offset some of that risk, because there's a chance it'll happen to someone in your family at some point. And to not be prepared for that just because you're trying to be as helpful as possible, I think you do have to kind of draw a line there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that kind of highlights too that maybe it makes more sense to begin to donate once you have reached a certain level of affluence, rather than before that.
Yeah, definitely. And Will MacAskill will make the argument that as long as you're above average for your country, then you don't really have any reason to say that, because then why can't you just do what half the people are literally doing in your in your situation? Like, they're doing okay, so you should be able to do that as well.
But if you're not as well off, let's say you're below the poverty line, $11,000 per year, and MacAskill says that yes, you are still amid the 15% richest people on the earth, and even accounting for expenses. And so one could take the tack that you should help people who are less well off than you. But on the other hand, you're living in a extremely stressful situation with a lot of very poor elements about your life that, like you said, family members having medical expenses, yourself having medical expenses, all these ways that you can fall through the gaps in our society if you're not comfortably well off.
Yeah.
And so that maybe it makes more sense to address your own needs at that point.
Yeah, and I definitely wouldn't agree with him that people below the poverty line should think about this stuff at all. Like, I think that's just kind of silly.
Yeah.
I forgot. Do you remember where he said that?
Toward the beginning, when he shows that graph we were talking about. I think he falls short of actually saying that they should donate, but I think he says that you should consider it.
Yeah, I definitely remember him saying that even people below the poverty line are still within the top 15%, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Within the U.S., I mean. So one thing I definitely wanted to ask you about all this is whether you think the idea of applying a scientific approach to figuring out these questions of how to have a positive impact is a valid pursuit.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I think he proves that unquestionably in the first chapter of his book. I mean, it's really, really obvious that if you want to help people, then maybe it makes more sense to think about it and have a plan and do so in a way that'll help the most, rather than just flinging money at a wall and seeing what'll stick.
Yeah, well, and even beyond just thinking about it really deeply and for a long time, being able to back it up with like hard evidence and numbers and that kind of thing.
Yeah, he uses the metaphor of if you were going to invest in some company and they didn't give you any feedback about how their money was going to be spent, then you wouldn't invest in the company. Or about how effective it was. Right.
And I think I already mentioned quality adjusted life years or QALYs, but
yeah, can you explain that?
Yeah, because this concept definitely kind of blew my mind when I read this book. But so a quality adjusted life year is basically a measurement of how much good a certain intervention in someone else's life will do on average. And the way, if we take like the intestinal worm thing for an example, you can ask people who suffer from that on any given day, if a perfect day was a 10, how are you feeling right now? And they'll give you a number, and you can average out all those numbers and then use that to determine how much better their life would be if they didn't have the intestinal worm problem. And then there's a formula to compare that to how good it would be if they literally just had extra years tagged on to the end of their life, right?
Right. So he has this graph here, a hypothetical example. So you could, on one hand, improve someone's quality of life by 20% for 60 years of their life. And so 60 years times 20% equals 12. That 12 QALYs. Or you could extend the life of that person who is currently at 70% health by 10 years. And so that is 10 extra years times 70% equals 7 QALYs.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so you would think effectively the better option is the first one because it's a greater number of QALYs. Mm-hmm. And to me that kind of feels intuitive. Like if you have someone's life and you can make it 20% better for 60 years, like I would choose that over 10 extra years of poorer health conditions.
Yeah, totally. I think it makes total sense. So yeah, I think it's pretty hard to dispute that it is good to take a quantitative approach to this whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think what's more debatable is the specific things that effective altruism tends to direct people towards, and kind of it does have a kind of a bias to be focused more on people in like the tech industry and that sort of thing.
How so?
Well, I mean, not necessarily going into the tech field, but so one thing that gets promoted a lot is the idea of working on AI safety, or kind of just existential risks in general. And I'll admit that's one thing that kind of really grabbed me when I when I looked into this. And part of what that is isn't just true for working on existential risk, but it's one of the big examples. Is there are a lot of problems that have a very small chance of having a huge impact, and therefore by working on them, you have a average, very good chance of helping people.
Yeah, and with such a large portfolio of people, we have a large opportunity to diversify, and so it makes sense to have some people investing in high risk, high reward situations.
Right. And part of the other, I think the thing that can make it kind of counterintuitive on the surface is they recommend a lot that people go into areas that are neglected. So like you aren't necessarily going to have a high impact working on climate change or cancer research or, becoming a doctor because so many other people already want to go into those fields. And if you don't go to that field, someone else will undoubtedly take your place. And they might even be doing that job better than you would. So you should really consider whether you're going to actually have a positive impact, because if you're taking the place of someone who would be doing the job better, then you're actually not having a positive impact.
Yeah, he uses the metaphor of what if someone's having a heart stopping, and you can run over and do CPR, but you're not really that good at it, and so you injure them, but you save their life. But then what if there's a paramedic right there, and you push the paramedic out of the way, and then you go do that?
yeah, exactly. So yeah, you have to be really, really careful. So it does have some biases, but I think a lot of them are a result of things like that they might seem like biases, but they're the result of kind of counterintuitive but correct determinations about how these things work.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the more valuable aspects of effective altruism, is applying the scientific method, and so you can learn from your mistakes. You see the feedback about what's effective and what isn't.
Yeah. Although I will say that the one big bias I feel that it has is towards international and global problems as opposed to national problems even, but even more than that, local and state problems, just because they affect so many fewer people. But we do need people working on those problems, because like if it's not like we can have no one working on those.
Yeah, totally.
And even not working on problems, but like there are plenty of really valuable occupations, like being a teacher, that like are like nowhere on the map for any of this stuff, at least that I've seen, that are really, really important. So
yeah, if you were to cut out those sort of things, it would be kind of the equivalent of saying, look, you need to donate all of your money, and even if you starve, donate all of your money. Even if you die, it's okay, you should donate all your money. Just do it.
Everyone should just rob a bank, and then some percentage of those people will succeed, and then they can donate all their money and then die. Plus, if everyone does it at once, there'll be a higher chance that people will succeed, because they'll just be so overwhelmed.
Mob the banks. We do not endorse nor encourage the actions of criminal activities and violence.
This is true.
Rob the banks.
What do you think about the idea of earning to give in general?
I think it's a valuable way to live a life, it seems to me.
Yeah.
make more so that you can help more. Seems very intentional.
Yeah. As long as you're doing something that you're sure is either ethically neutral more or less, or helping just a little bit. You're not working for like like an oil company or something.
Uh-huh. Yeah, why is that? I mean, that seems true to me, that it doesn't actually make sense to do ethically negative things in order to have a greater overall benefit towards good. But why is that?
Well, I guess because it's given that there's probably some other field that's either neutral or positive that you could be making a similar amount of money in with a similar amount of work.
But what if there isn't? What if the most money you can make by far is by doing something unethical?
Well, I guess we have to distinguish between unethical and well, it depends how it's unethical, right? Like stealing from a bank is unethical, but I think a lot of people would agree that I would maybe count myself among these, but if you can steal from a bank and not harm the bank and also donate the money to somewhere that needs it, then it might be unethical, but it's
sure. I mean Robin Hood.
Yeah, I mean it's the whole would you steal bread to feed your family thing.
Mm-hmm. But like, what if you work for BP and you're just like part of the mechanism that makes that happen and lets them spill jillions of gallons of oil into the Gulf of Mexico, and you're doing that so that you can earn $400,000 a year and donate $350,000 a year to effective altruism?
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't think that's the worst thing you could possibly do, especially if you're donating it directly to a lot of climate type stuff that's actively offsetting the bad that your job might be doing.
Can't unspill the oil. Can't unpoison the creatures and reconstitute the ecosystems that were destroyed irreparably.
Yeah, that's true. But I think it does come back to the 80,000 hours thing. Like that's a ton of time to put into something that you don't believe in and you believe is actively harming the world. And I think that would probably dampen your motivation to move up the ranks and perform well and that kind of thing.
Maybe but what if it doesn't, because you believe in effective altruism and you have calculated that you can do the most good by making the most money doing this thing that is wrong so that you can help the most people?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you would have to actually know that there's not a better job out there for you, which is I guess kind of one of the root questions of all of this. Like how can you actually know that you're maximizing, even if you figure out that there's this very good option? How do you know that it's actually the maximum? And of course you can never really know, but it's an interesting question.
Yeah, that is an interesting question. How can you know you're achieving your greatest potential?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've heard if you're working in a field and it just seems like doors are flying open, and you just keep getting positive feedback from people, and it seems like you're just getting really lucky. That's probably a sign that it's the right place for you.
Boy, you're really good at sweeping these oil spills under the rug. It's like you're born for this job. You've got a knack for it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that doesn't really apply to this like doing something unethical to earn money thing.
Mm-hmm. But okay, so I'm asking these pointed questions, and like on a certain level, it does make sense that you could do that, and yeah, you would maybe be doing the most good to the world. But I think why it doesn't work is going back to the concept of the high risk, high reward scenarios. And let's say you're working at BP, but maybe the high reward would be if a bunch of people refused to work at BP so that they were less effectual and eventually shut down or became smaller. If you are complacently working as part of that system, then you were not taking that risk of being able to get that high reward. But if you refuse to work there, and then also a bunch of other people do, then you could potentially get that payoff.
Right. Although with something as big as an oil company, I feel like it's going to be the kind of thing, again, where if you don't do it, and even if 10 other people don't do it, someone's going to take those jobs.
Mm-hmm. But maybe those people who take the jobs do a worse job of it.
Maybe so.
Which could be a good thing or a bad thing, I guess. Do they do a worse job with the maintenance or a worse job covering up the problem so that people don't pay attention to it?
Yeah, it's a lot of gray area for sure.
Fun stuff.
Yeah. So I'm wondering what you think the implications of all this are for a life spent as an artist or a musician.
I think that, as we talked about in the first episode, right? Should there be art? I think that it's a very nebulous thing that such careers, it's possible to have a meaningful career and help people and improve the world in ways that are absolutely necessary, but maybe a lot of the people who are pursuing those careers are not necessary for that payoff to happen.
How would that be?
Well, like considering the statistic that 85% of people who graduate with a music degree do not go on to work in the field because there are not that many jobs in music available. So you have a lot of people pursuing that career but for no reason, right? With no gain. It's still necessary to have some people pursuing music, but maybe not as many people.
Yeah.
Or maybe in a different way than we are now.
Yeah, I see what you mean, and I do agree with that. You have to have a certain number of people pursue something to really find the people who are actually going to be best at it and have the have the best impact. Yeah, that definitely makes sense.
Yeah, and then I would like to say as well that something like a music teacher, which I may very well be biased on this point, I feel like has a possibility to do a great amount of good for people in a way that is very unmeasurable. Although you can say it seems to me likely that by teaching people music, teaching them to think, to have a healthy mind, and that is definitely a good thing that will help the world in uncountable ways. Still,
yeah, I do agree that, especially with something like teaching music, it's really hard to measure the impact, and it can be kind of nebulous. And I definitely agree it's positive. But I the one thing we haven't really talked about, or one of the things we haven't really talked about, that Will MacAskill mentioned, is the idea of not following your passion. And I wonder if that comes into play here.
Yeah, can you explain that to me?
Yeah. Well, uh, it's kind of a meme, right? You know, do what you love, follow your passion,
Mm-hmm.
go where your heart leads you. Um, but it's not necessarily the thing you're going to be the best at, right? Even if you're
Mm.
passionate about it, you might still get burnt out, as I kind of discovered,
Yeah.
and it might not have the impact that you think it's going to have. And that's kind of where the more analytical approach comes in.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know, maybe it has a lot to do with people misunderstanding what their passions are.
Yeah, I definitely think that that can be true. Because yeah, none of us really know how durable any of our interests or passions are going to be, and how deeply we're going to want to stick with it, even when the going gets tough.
Yeah. And how can you find out but to do it, right?
Right, right. Yeah, and that's something I have to keep going back to personally. It's just like there's no other way other uh, than to actually try things.
Mm.
Yeah, and you might never actually know because it's a really hard thing to pin down. Yeah, I really wish there was more out there on the the relationship between all this effective altruism stuff and art, because there's like very little from what I've seen.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something that's just very hard to measure, or maybe
Mm-hmm.
impossible. One thing, in regard to being a music teacher, have you ever had a student who's just like really picking it up really super fast to the point where you're kind of scared that you're not giving them the best that they could have?
Uh, I don't I don't know if I've had a student like that who like when they started, I was like, oh yeah, I can obviously like help you a lot. It's more if I get a student who's more advanced, when I'm like,
Mm.
oh, I hope I can actually help this person, and then it's kind of always this battle of like, am I able to do enough?
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it's very, it's almost never that it's someone who starts, and I feel like I can, it's so obvious I'm supposed to help them, and what exactly
Mm-hmm.
the right things to do, and then they suddenly they shoot way past what I can feel like I can help with.
Yeah, so I had a 8-year-old girl as a student who picked everything up just super, super friggin' fast and really intuitively, to the point where I kind of got scared at the beginning of every lesson
Mm-hmm.
because, like, shit, I have to put myself in overdrive. I have to be absolutely on top of everything to even attempt uh, to keep up, you know,
Mm-hmm.
to let them learn without forcing onto or allowing them to imprint to my own uh, cognitive shortcomings,
Mm-hmm.
right? The ways that I learn that are less efficient than the ways that this little girl is learning, to to not force her into those trenches simply through proximity. It is so daunting.
Yeah.
Um, but the thing I kept coming back to is I'm doing the best I can, and who would be teaching her if I weren't? And since we're on a small island here on Martha's Vineyard, there's a limited number of music teachers, and I am confident in my ability. I've had a lot of good feedback, people who have been very enthusiastic about my teaching, and I know a couple other teachers who I imagine could do a good job as well,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't have any reason to suspect that they could do a better job than I could. And so that made me feel confident that even if I am giving this little girl imperfect, less than the best person could give her that exists in the world. I'm giving her the best that is attainable in the local environment.
Yeah, that's something I definitely struggle with living in Austin, because it's definitely a different situation.
Mm.
And yeah, I know there are, especially since, it's a town with a big university music school. It's like, I know there's tons of just, crazy, amazing piano teachers and that whole thing. And
mm-hmm.
yeah, but I mean, to be one of those amazing teachers, there's no other way other than to get the experience and put the hours in and make the mistakes. And
yeah, oh god, I was a horrible teacher when I started out.
Yeah, same here. So I'm glad you had such a positive response to this.
Yeah.
Overall.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm curious to see how it ends up percolating.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe where my stance is now, having worked through, I think it's a lot of very valuable material, and that I might still be trying to get on top, so to speak, so that I can start helping more effectively.
Mm-hmm.
And until that time, I'm going to be focusing on improvements for myself, so that I can get to a point where I can comfortably help people effectively. I'm still quite a bit lower than the average income for America.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think for both of us, these definitely, like, the donating money thing is less of something to be concerned about, just because we're still building up our careers and still making our way towards actually making, like, a livable wage.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's good to think about in terms of, like, life trajectory and general outlook and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I've always had the desire to be better off, and have been at least marginally working towards that.
Mm-hmm.
So that hasn't really changed that much.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe it's just like a new lens to look at things through.
Yeah, maybe a little more inspiration, maybe a reason to look at trying harder as being something that could actually be meaningful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and it's nice knowing that so many people are thinking really hard about this and working on it, and all kind of have a similar mindset about it.
Yeah. We're not all selfish pricks like me.
Yeah. Thank Jesus.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Didn't Jesus say, reportedly, it's easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to go to heaven?
I think that's that's accurate.
I think that's true.
Yeah. Assuming Jesus existed.
Yes.
It says that in the Bible, at least.
I think that's metaphorically true.
Well, we hope you'll join us next time. Bye.